All right, everyone, I am starting the March 5th, 2025 meeting of the Finance Committee. With us today is the assessor and a man who is coming to talk to us about Article 15. And I will just turn it right over to you and tell us what this is about and what it means and what the consequences will be.
Sure, thank you very much. Nice to see all of you again. I want to talk a little bit about Article 15, which is an article to change the language of our act regarding the senior circuit breaker, if you will, tax exemption. The reason that we're proposing this change to the language of the act is we ran into and recognized the problem this year. This was the first year that we implemented this tax exemption. The act allows for the funding of this exemption only within the tax rate of the residential class. So to do that, what we do is change the value, the total value of the residential class by the amount of the exempted, the total amount of exemption. So what that means is we have to take applications ahead of time. We took them in September, and we determined who was eligible based on all the requirements, most of which come from the state. This program is modeled after the state's circuit breaker tax credit. So the state is providing applicants with a credit on their state income tax. All of the criteria, a lot of the criteria, impacts our exemption. For instance, homes must be valued under a certain amount. So a home that's valued over, I think it was $1,057,000, would not qualify. The town also has some requirements that don't impact the state. So they're unique to Arlington. And one of them is the asset requirement. So, and that was determined by the Board of Assessors. We discussed it, we looked at what other towns were doing, and we implemented a specific asset limit. So it's a mixture of these local requirements and state requirements, modeled at the state income. Good evening, gentlemen. Good evening. So when we accept all of the applications, we determine who's eligible, we determine the amount of their exemption, and we work backwards to determine the total value of their exemption. And that's how we know how much to reduce the residential class valuation. And what happens is we don't change the levy for the residential class. So the residential levy is being collected on a reduced valuation. And so that's how the funds are collected to go in and rebate the amount, the value of that reduction. So if we can go to the first. So at that point, we now know the total value that we're going to be reducing. the select board, according to the act, shall determine a percentage of the state tax credit to determine the amount of reduction. So they can choose between 50% up to 200%. Yeah. And so once we know the tax rate, we can determine these numbers. And the select board gets to make a choice. Now, when we ran those numbers, we ran into a little bit of an issue. Because we're limited by Proposition 2.5, we had to, at a certain point of value to determine the tax rate, we ran into a rounding issue. All of our rate data goes into the state system called Gateway that's managed by the DLS and the DOR. And their system rounds the tax rate. And so as the value changes, it changes the tax rate. And so it gets to a point where it wants to add a penny to the rate for the residential class. However, when that happened, we realized that the amount being collected by that additional penny exceeded our Proposition 2.5 limit. Because of that, we had to eliminate some of the options that the select board could choose from. And we were limited to just the first option of 50%. And if you look at the options page, the second page, there's two numbers that we want to look at here. So this was changing the residential value by the 50% benefit. We see that the tax levy.
50% or 75%?
This is, I'm sorry, could we back up one? Yeah, here we go. So at 50%, our tax levy is $166,280,494. That doesn't change, right? We have to collect that amount of money. What's changing here is the amount that we're collecting. So at 1077, which is the tax rate across the board here, in other words, the half penny hasn't kicked in yet. So we're still at $10.77. Our, whoops.
Scroll down a little bit.
Sorry, scroll. Oh. Does everyone have that?
No.
Well, what we're looking at is this number. Yeah, right there. Nope, sorry. I have to go back to 50.
I'm sorry about that.
There we go. This number is smaller than this number. So what that means is we're collecting enough money to support our amount to be collected, and yet we're not exceeding our tax levy. If we go to the next slide, the 75%, that changes. because now we're increasing the amount of our exempted value. And we see that this number is now larger than this number. We're exceeding our levy limit. We can't do that. So the select board chose 50% as their only option. And that's fine. That worked out on the cost side. I'm sorry. Cost.
Oh, I'm sorry. Is it part of that package?
Just a single page.
A single
Sorry.
page, okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Discuss it.
The very bottom one.
Great, yeah. So what we see in the second column is the total value of the exemptions. It was 21 people qualified. So this is at 50%, that's the total exempted amount. And put another way, that's the cost of this exemption. Now, in this case, we were able to collect all of that money within the tax rate at the same tax rate as all of the other classes. Worked out nicely. The reason that I'm proposing this warrant article is that that might not always be the case. So depending on where we land on the half penny and where the penny changes the tax rate for the residential class will determine how many options the select board has. And I'm afraid at some point, the math will work out where there won't be an option. And it puts us at risk of, what were we calling it, Alex?
It would put us at risk of,
Reputational risk.
yeah, it would put us at risk of, like, basically wouldn't be able to run the exemption even though we are required to by our own act. And it would do damage to, like, we're not entirely sure how we would solve this if it came to it. We have to deal with the DLS, we may take a free cash hit or something, but uncharted waters for us.
Exactly. And so while we were going through this, we contacted the Department of Revenue. And we laid out the issue. And the first thing they said, well, take the money out of the overlay account. Except that our act specifically does not allow that. And so when we brought that to their attention, they backtracked quite quickly. There is one town in Massachusetts, the town of Hingham, who has this almost exact act, except that they inserted a clause that allows them to appropriate the amount needed for the exemption from their overlay account, which is where all other exemptions and abatements come from. That's the reason I'm requesting this warrant article. We're still tweaking it. We don't have a official vote from the Board of Assessors yet. We didn't have a quorum at our last meeting. We hope to do that, or at least have a decision on this at our next meeting, which is the 24th. So I think I've covered why we want this option. We've talked a little bit about the cost. Let's go back to that single page. So I mentioned the options from 50% to 200%. Obviously, those numbers change the cost of this exemption. If the board voted 200%, we can see in our numbers from fiscal year 25 that the 200% option would have cost $87,678. So there's quite a fluctuation there. And as I did a sample of what, I think would be reasonable expectations in terms of a change in the number of applicants, thus a change in the total value of the exemption. So the range moves from the $22,000 up to $153,000. So that's our world of cost. It would be difficult to extend this out into multiple year estimates. We're trying to factor in the tax rates, which would get very difficult to do. So, any questions? I know there's a lot here. It's very complicated.
I just want some clarification.
Oh, sure.
The warrant article says, or funded by an appropriation or transfer from existing funds. So that's more than just from the overlay, right? That the possibility is there.
That's a good point.
I would interpret the language as written to, yes, it could mean other things.
Right. And
But it would require an appropriation bill to cover it. Part of the problem with that is the time factor. We do all our appropriating at town meeting, right, in the spring, and then we aren't rate setting until the following, sort of like mid to late fall. And so we would need to proactively estimate how much to appropriate for that, where we'd use a different funding source.
Whereas the overlay is not traditionally appropriated. It's under the direction or supervision of the Board of Assessors, and they can vote to release at any time. There's no time sensitivity. In other words, we can fund an abatement or an exemption at any time. And that's what this would be a release from the overlay by the Board of Assessors.
And can the select board at any year opt for 200%?
So yes, there's no limit right now on the select board options. And that's something that we're looking at. If we were to make changes, that would be something we would look at.
All right, questions, Charlie, then Annie, and then Michael, and then Aaron.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So, am I correct in saying that this article, number one, wants to change the language in the existing bylaw?
Yes.
And number two, are we approving this increase of the 5%?
No.
That already it's baked in.
Yes, we know that is increasing for the next fiscal year, so I plugged it into our numbers here just as an estimate.
That's increase in the credit is driven by the state.
Yes.
So the only potential increase in cost that the town has control over is which select board option is chosen
That's correct.
and how it's funded.
Right. In other words, we don't know how many people are going to apply. We don't know how many are going to be approved. That can all change.
So isn't it true that if somebody applies for an exemption, and let's say they're 70 years old, for example, and they're gonna live to be 85, okay? So that means that that exemption is riding with that person for 15 years.
Well, they have to qualify every year.
Yeah, but they're unlikely to go in the other direction where they're not gonna qualify, right?
True. Except that, I would point out that there's another unintended consequence of this act. The formula for qualifying is your income, your taxes, property tax plus 50% of your water tax bill must exceed 10% of your income to qualify. Now, the first year, we're gonna look at your income and we're gonna look at your tax, and it's gonna be about $10,000, and depending on what your income is, the amount that it exceeds 10% of your income is what you will qualify for. The next year, when you get the credit, when you get the exemption on your taxes, you may not qualify because it's going to reduce the amount of taxes that you pay in that year. It's just an unintended yes, right, so it's gonna do this. So one year you might qualify, the next year you may not. So
So you could say in the worst case, you qualify every other year.
yes,
Okay. So then that person who would be in a 15-year schedule would have 7 or 8 years of exemption, right?
yes,
So the real cost of this is the 25 or 30 applicants times the number of years times the average increase in our taxes, which is 5% a year in Arlington at least, and times the 8 or 9 years. So it's not the cost of $1,000 for the average exemption, it's actually probably $20,000.
over 20 years.
Yeah, well, but that's what we're voting on. We're voting on that cost. We're not just voting on what the cost is this year. We're essentially laying out an obligation to the town for 10 or 20 years into the future.
Right. And I would add to that we don't know from year to year how much we will be able to apply from the tax rate. In other words, there is an amount where you don't exceed the levy. Like, for instance, like what happened last year at 50% option, the numbers worked out. So we will still be able to utilize that amount and only have to use the overlay for what exceeds the cost that exceeds what we're able to collect through the tax rate.
Maybe if I could just rephrase the question, maybe I'm making too many assumptions here. If we don't pass this, how much money will we not spend?
Depends on the year.
Depends on the year.
Depends on the year, depends on the cost of the exemption, right? We see these numbers here.
Well, we've already ascertained that the only choice the selectmen have is the first line.
Well, only because that's the way the numbers worked last year. The tax rate will get us a certain amount, depending on where the amount to be collected falls between the half penny, where it doesn't round up and disqualify us.
But, Dana, aren't you looking at this from an optics viewpoint as opposed to a real viewpoint? I mean, it doesn't matter whether it comes from the overlay or from the tax rate or whatever. Ultimately, the taxpayers are paying for it.
Yes.
And so the question I'm asking is, if we don't accept this, what are we saving the taxpayers? That's the question. Is it the difference between 27,000 and 41,000 in that column?
Or zero. So as I said, there's going to be a year where we're not able to cover even the 50%. And we won't spend anything. There'll be no cost.
Okay, but the years in which we're gonna spend, let's say the next year we can spend it, okay? Does that mean that if we don't pass this, we're at the 27,000 in the first column, we're at the 27,000, but if we pass it, we're gonna go to the 41 or the 54?
He's looking at the 25 applicant column.
I mean, the
Right.
question I'm asking, what is the cost of this? That's the question.
It's hard to say, Charlie. Like I said, if the tax rate numbers fall in a certain area, the amount that we'll be able to collect will be less than the first column, the first option, and we'll collect nothing, and there'll be no cost to the program because we won't be able to provide an exemption to anyone, even though we've collected their application, and they have qualified.
I understand that.
Okay.
My question is, if we're going ahead to grant the exemptions, and we pass this, bylaw,
Well, yeah,
okay? What's the increased cost to the taxpayer? It doesn't matter whether it comes from the tax rate or the overlay
yeah,
or the reserve, it could be the finance committee's reserve fund, but it's gonna cost something.
last year it was $21,919.
Okay, and if we pass this, can it go up to the 75% level?
If we pass this, can it go up? Yes, it could, and we'd have to determine where the funding would come from. But yes, it could cost us up to $153,436
In this matrix.
in this matrix, which is difficult to estimate.
Okay, so that's really what we're voting on tonight. It's not whether it comes from the overlay, that's a detail of fiscal management.
Yes,
But we're voting on is what is it gonna cost the taxpayer? And in your matrix, it's up to 153,000, and that's for 1 year.
right,
And if these people have a repeated access to the exemption, say for 10 years, we're talking about 1.5 million. That's the financial impact of tonight's decision. That's what
Yes.
I'm trying to get to.
right, but it would not impact the budget. There'd be no change to the budget. Right now, we budget a
No
certain
change to the
amount.
budget now, but if you're taking it out of the overlay, sooner or later, you're gonna wanna have more money in the overlay.
That's true.
In the strategic view, we're spending this money.
That's true. I don't think we'll have to make any change in the budget for 10 years.
Where are you gonna get $1.5 million?
In the overlay and what we add to the overlay every year. What do we budgeted to add to the overlay each year?
600,000.
Oh, 600. And we give back some amount each year.
But you're gonna be taking out more than you would otherwise take out, so you have to replenish it.
Eventually, yes.
So it's a taxpayer cost. I just wanna make it clear what we're talking about tonight.
Yes.
Thank you.
Annie,
Okay, so I have a couple of questions. So how many actual recipients of this are there?
21 last year,
And that's 21 who qualified out of how many applicants?
30.
Okay, so there were some people who applied who didn't qualify on income, on value of the house, et cetera.
Yes,
Okay, and that value of the house is regardless of mortgage or debt or any of that, it's just the raw value.
correct. Assessment, it's the assessment.
The assessment, so if your assessment is over $1 million something, you're not eligible for this.
Yes.
And if your income is over a certain amount of money, in other words, it exceeds your total tax plus, there was something other component to it. So it's your income, your tax plus your water bill, half your water bill. So if your property tax under your assessment plus half your water bill exceeds 10% of your income.
Yeah.
Okay, then you're not eligible for this. So if, for example, you're retired.
No, you would be eligible if your
Exceeds, you
taxes.
would be eligible.
Yes.
Okay, so let's say that, you know, your tax bill is $8,000 and your water bill is $2,000, that's $9,000. In order for you to not be eligible, your income would have to exceed $90,000.
Correct.
Okay, so, and we don't know how many people are actually eligible, we only know how many applied.
Right, we suspect there's a lot more people eligible because we know the number of state qualified applicants.
Do we know what that number is?
It was 600 applicants. 600 qualified. The latest number I
On
had
state
was,
credit.
was 2021 from the
Yeah.
state. But that includes renters, which
Mhm.
wouldn't be the case here in town, right? They have to own a home in Arlington.
Own a home, so we don't know how many of those 600 were getting whatever the circuit breaker from the state
We don't.
are. All right, so we put money into the overlay reserve every year. Do we know what the current balance in the overlay reserve is?
It's a very healthy balance,
Approximately,
3.3 million.
okay, $3.3 million already in there. And what is our average number of dollars of abatement every year that we've accumulated $3 million?
Right, so exemptions and abatements.
Yep.
Are about 400,000 per year.
And we're budgeting about 600,000.
Yes, but there are other responsibilities of the overlay.
What are those?
They are outstanding real estate collections
Okay,
and personal property.
okay. So there's other abatements or exemptions somebody could ask
Nope.
for, or no? It's
Nope.
just-
We're required
Yeah.
within the overlay
Yeah.
to have available funds to cover any amount of outstanding or uncollected.
Real estate tax or
Yes.
personal property tax.
Yes.
Okay, so if we haven't collected from somebody and they owe us, while we're waiting to collect that money, we have to take it out of the overlay in order to have the income to cover our budget.
Yes,
Okay,
at a particular time.
all right. So $3.3 million, you're putting 600 in, you're taking 400 out, modulo uncollected taxes, or does that include the uncollected taxes? That 400,000 that's coming out?
So we have to reserve a certain amount. We have to have
Okay.
monies available if something were to occur in town that would
Would cause us to
Result-
have to
yes.
develop.
thank you,
What is the requirement for that reservation, for that reserve?
that's up to the assessors.
That's up to the assessors. How are you deciding how much you need to have in the overlay to cover the possible real estate tax failure to collect on real estate and personal property? What's your number in your head?
There's no formula, there's no
Yeah, right.
requirement, it's up to the assessor
Yeah, what
to vote.
do you personally use?
I don't get a vote,
What do they vote?
different each year,
Okay.
so, because the number is different each year.
Okay,
There's no formula.
so they're just holding a certain amount of money because they are predicting a certain amount of failure to
In the
collect.
event of a failure. In addition to that, we have to set aside for cases that are at the ATB.
Got it.
So people have appealed,
You
our
said no,
decision.
they've appealed, and you're waiting to find out whether or not you're gonna be required to
right,
make
and
an
there's
adjustment.
multiple years.
Multiple years. Okay. But 3.3 is healthy.
Yes,
Okay. So that kind of gives us the big picture here. All right, and there's always gonna be a certain amount of this money we can take out of tax collected to fulfill whatever we're doing here.
So, no, we never, well, we have not
Right.
raised money specifically outside of what's in the budget every year.
No, I guess what I'm saying is, you're saying, we don't have to take, for this $21,000 in 2025, we don't have to take any money out of the overlay for that. But if the select board, for example, decided that they were going to go to the $32,000 level and they had the overlay available, then you would have to take $11,000 out of the overlay to make up that number.
If that's all we collect in the
That's
tax.
all you could collect in the taxes. So there's always gonna be some percentage you can collect in the taxes, which could be 100% of whatever the select board's choice is, or it could be 80% and you get the other 20% out of the overlay. Okay. And the select board gets to choose their number every year. So if this year they
Right
made
now.
75% and a bunch of people who had applied got a tax exemption, and next year they applied and they still qualified, and the select board decided to do 50%, their exemption would be smaller.
Right, they would
Like an applicant doesn't
qualify,
get a permanent 75%, they get whatever the number is the select board chooses this year.
correct.
Okay, I think I get the picture. Hopefully, that helps everybody else and it wasn't just me wanking away. Thank you.
Michael?
Question's been answered, thank you.
Al Costa.
Ever since Prop 2.5 passed, this town has taxed to the limit. I mean, for a while, we determined the assessor's salary by how close you could get to the limit. So we're paying for this program in the rounding that we weren't able to get to. In other words,
No.
it's, at some point, you're always gonna have some unused levy capacity.
Yeah.
It might be 20,000, it might be 200, but there'll be something there. And it seems to me that's how we're paying for this now.
No. The payment method where we're collecting the same amount of levy. What we're doing is we're collecting it over a less amount of value. So to pay for this, we reduce the residential valuation by the amount of the exemption, but we do not reduce the levy.
Okay, so basically, it's a shift. You're.
Yes, it is.
It's a shift from everybody else to these people
You got it.
Okay.
Within the residential class.
within the residential class. So the taxpayer does okay, it's just some taxpayers do better than other taxpayers.
These particular taxpayers who apply and qualify pay less.
And the others, everybody else pays more.
Yes,
To cover it, yeah.
Okay. Now, this was the first year you did this?
yes.
So you have 600 qualified under the state. Let's say half of them are renters, and that's probably overdoing it.
Yep.
That means 300 people could qualify. Right now you had 30 applicants. So this 22,000 could be 10 times that.
It could, but I think what really affected the number of applicants was the value limit. So your home has to be assessed less than $1 million. I think it was 57,000.
Yeah.
I think that was a large restriction. And the other restriction was the assets. We had 2 people who didn't qualify because of the assets, but I think we had a lot more who did not apply because of the asset requirement, which was $300,000 in retirement. Or if you had an additional home, a second home, you were disqualified.
So if you're paying for this whole thing, whether it's 22,000 or 153,000, by shifting from the less liability in some taxpayers and more liability, shouldn't we always have enough money?
We
If
should, yeah, right. So I think the person who wrote this thought we would. But what's happening is because of the rounding, when the tax rate moves from that 10.77 to 10.78, the value of 1 penny in this town on the residential class is $157 million. And when that hits, when that factors into the amount collected, that's where we exceed our Prop 2.5 limit. So that's what's happening. It's an unintended consequence of the way that we're collecting the funds for this.
Thank you.
Josh? Josh?
Are you calling me? Oh. Are we limited to that precision? We can't go out past 2 digits?
Yes, because of the Department of Revenue. There is talk about people wanting to add 2 digits to the tax rate, which would solve our problem.
I mean, I think the whole intent of the circuit breaker is to exactly that, to shift the load and say that our senior citizens who are not able to buy fixed income, the rest of us are gonna pick that up, right? I mean, it's the whole intent, so it should be a shock.
Yes.
And I guess I would think that if we're facing a big override and people's property taxes can go up even higher, then we might, just like building a new high school, we might get more students in the high school, we might get more people applying for it because their tax burden is going up and they might not qualify, so. I don't think it is definitely a cost for the taxpayers, but again, that's like the total intention of both things, to shift the burden to people who can pay it more easily.
Jennifer?
Yes, I'm just trying to figure out the history behind it. So this was a vote by town meeting, is that right? I remember this being discussed last year, but,
well,
oh, it wasn't, okay.
It was.
Yeah,
but
but
it
to allow
also-
the select board to do this.
It also required a public vote.
This was a ballot.
Oh, okay, great.
After it went to town meeting.
After a town
it went
meeting,
to
then
a
went
ballot.
out. Do we know the numbers on that? What support in the town?
It was the most overwhelming vote you could
So
imagine.
like really a lot of support.
Yeah.
Okay.
More so than the override vote at the same time.
Yeah, okay, so this is all fuzzily coming back to me. Great. So, and I assume, so there a lot of popularity in the town. I assume this is something select board is interested in. It seems to me that if we vote for this article, we're not voting to change some tax structure. What we're doing is allowing the select board to have some flexibility that they don't have now, that the voters probably thought they would have had, right? But somehow didn't know that there was this weird snafu here, right? So we're sort of just restoring the integrity of what the taxpayers, the voters thought they were voting for.
Yes.
Okay. Do we have any sense of, the select board votes each year, do we have any sense of what they would like to do if they had more freedom on it? So were they leaning towards 75%, but then we're told, oh, I can't do it this year? Is that, or do we know?
Unfortunately, they didn't get to vote on it. Because
Okay,
it
so
was
they're
just-
just told right away, this is zero, okay,
Won't work.
so we don't know what they're doing.
I think the only guidance that we were prepared to offer is that it would be unwise to ever contemplate considering more than 100%
Mhm.
due to the likely net negative impact to the taxpayer. Because if we give them too much relief in a given year,
Oh, then the
it's
next
not the
year.
case that the following year they will miss out on ours. They're gonna lose eligibility from ours because they're not gonna qualify for the state circuit
Oh,
tax
no,
breaker.
okay.
So they're gonna lose 2,500 from the Commonwealth as well as 2,500 from the town. So
Got it,
this,
okay.
like, the ability to go up to 200%
Is
is somewhat
theoretical.
false, because if you
Okay.
were to do that, you will harm your intended recipient of this benefit. So we were prepared, if the option existed, to advise, like, you should not
Never,
exceed
okay, got it,
100%, because you will reach this tipping point where you will, in thinking you're doing a good thing, you will have, in fact, cost that particular resident in need the following year more than you benefited them in the preceding year.
So,
I I have to say, every time I've ever worked on a ride, the concern that most people have are for people who don't have the means, and especially seniors who don't have the ability to sort of make that up with extra work or something.
Yeah.
And that has been a persistent concern.
And if I could just, not only does town meeting have to approve this warrant article, but it's a request to move it back to the legislature to make this change in language.
Mhm.
So it has to go
So
through
it's a
both.
home rule petition?
Correct.
Yeah. Anything else? Complicated. Thank you very much for that, all those clarifications. John?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so just looking for a quick refresher on like the total cost of this thing, and I know you did go into it in a little bit of detail. So last year, it cost there was 21,000 of rebates given, 21,000, that was the total. And that was because the select board voted at 50%, decided to go with 50%. So what is that 50% of? So what is the 43,839? What is that?
So most people would have applied to the state for the tax credit prior to applying to the town. So they earn a tax credit. The percentage is actually on the amount that they were awarded as a tax credit. So if they
Is that the
got,
circuit breaker? So when you apply for the circuit breaker, which is part of your income taxes, you get, so that's kind of fed to us from the state.
Well-
That's super complicated, a bunch of different variables into that. So that we are handed the 43,839. I mean,
I'm sorry,
so I was wondering where the 43,839 comes from, because that's what we're deciding whether to go with 25% of, 50% or 75% or 100%.
right, so let's say that someone was awarded $1,000 from the state as their credit.
Yeah,
That's the 50 or 75%, so
Got
they
it.
would either get 5,000
Yeah.
or 7,500.
okay, so now I see where the 43,000 comes from, and then our select board decided to go with 50% of that. Now, is the select board locked into these increments, 50, 75, 100, or 0? Could they go with like 27 or 18?
They
So they could
could,
go with any number they want.
yes.
Yep, so.
They can't be
for
less
some-
than 50%.
50 to
Right,
200.
right, I'm sorry.
Excuse me,
Has to be between 50 and 200.
50?
Yeah, 50% and 200%.
Okay, so it can't go to 0?
Unless we find ourselves in a situation, right, if we're in now and we
Yeah.
cannot use the overlay, if in order to fund this, the rounding occurred,
Yeah.
there could be a year in which, our act says we shall do this, but we shall not be able to do this.
Got it.
Because the 50% would trigger a rounding, and because we're so heavily residential, that property class just can't handle it, it generates too much tax levy.
Got it. Okay, so it sounds like, let's just say 20,000 was what was the rebate last year. But only 21 people qualified, they jumped through all the hurdles, the 21 people, and that cost us 21,000. I was just thinking what the high end is, because I have the same kind of concern as a few other people, that once word of this gets out, it'll easily go from 20 people to 40 people to 100 people.
Right, what we'd have to estimate is how many of those people exceed the assessment amount,
Yeah,
which it makes it difficult to predict.
and then the final question is, if I remember last year, there was, wasn't there a cap on how much this could cost? Wasn't it like 1.5 million? So they'll never go, wasn't there a cap in the warrant? $1 million or something like that?
It was 1%.
1%
I'm sorry.
of the levy.
The levy, which is.
Yeah, which-
The world, yeah. Okay, that was very helpful, thank you.
All right, Jordan, and then Alan, and then Paul, and then Rebecca.
I'm good, thank you.
All right, Alan.
Going back to Al's question, the 600 estimate from the state and 300 might be homeowners. Don't they already have the assessed value baked into that? We have the same bar as the state, except for the total asset test, right?
Yes,
So if there were 300 qualified for the state, 300 could potentially apply and only be filtered out by the asset test.
Yes, I'm sorry, you're
Okay.
right. The state looks at the assessment level as well. In fact, they determine the assessment level.
Right,
The assets, they don't have.
right. It's like they set a certain criteria and then we add the asset test
Yes.
to it, but it could be pretty high. I'm not sure how all the arithmetic of rounding trickles through all of this, but if we don't do that, do you think there's a hypothetical possibility where 25% would be impossible because of rounding, but 50% would be, and we'd be forced to go to a higher percentage because the rounding screwed us up at 25 and worked at 50?
So they have to vote at least 50. There's no option
Okay.
for 25.
Oh, okay. Well, 50, call the other way. If the rounding error screwed us up at 50, but it worked at 75, would we be forced to go to 75 and then
No. The select board chooses.
even if the 50% took us over the limit?
Oh, no.
Because of rounding?
No, that's just it. So at 75% last year.
Yeah.
We exceeded our Proposition 2.5 amount.
Because of the rounding error.
Yeah, that completely takes that option off the table.
Yeah.
And they were forced to choose the 50%.
Okay. Is there a reason, would there be a reason to limit the makeup to just the overlay? Would that be a good thing to do instead of any fund?
The overlay is a particularly good option because it doesn't require an appropriation.
Okay, would limiting it to the overlay in the recommended vote, do you think that would be acceptable in the scope of the article? Could the recommended vote say overlay only? I mean, the warrant isn't the recommended vote. The recommended vote, could that limit it to the overlay? And be within the scope of the state
Yes,
article?
because every other account would require an appropriation.
Okay, so if we wanted to limit it to just the overlay, that could be in the recommended vote. Okay.
Well,
I probably want to confirm that with
Yeah.
council, but
Yeah.
Okay,
I see what you're saying,
I think
yeah.
the moderator would have to say it was within the scope.
Yeah.
Within the scope of the article. Okay, and then the last one, you said we use the overlay to make up for uncollected taxes sometimes. You say that?
We have to have an amount available should something catastrophic were to occur and half the town didn't pay their taxes.
Yeah.
We're tasked with being able to handle that.
Okay, my question was going to be, if you pulled $1 million out of the overlay to make up for uncollected taxes, and then those taxes were collected in the next year, would it go back into the overlay, or would it go into the general fund?
General fund.
Thank you.
Paul. Two questions or two issues. How many property owners are in the residence class? Well, guesstimate.
Wait a minute, I brought how many residents are in the residential class? Approximately 12,000.
And does that count someone, if a company owns an apartment building, does that count as one
It's one taxpayer.
taxpayer?
Right, it has to be a residence.
The property owner.
Although condos qualify.
Each condo would pay.
Yes.
And how many residences are in the town, including rentals?
So rentals would not qualify.
Right, but the person or company that owns the rental property would have to pay property tax on what they own.
Okay, isn't there something like 22,000 residential, like housing units in town?
So.
Around 20,000, yeah.
Yeah, just over.
So here's the point I wanna make is, the effect on, from this current fiscal year, the 20-some thousand resident, whatever, residences was $1. So, because it was 21,000 that was exempted, and so it increased the taxes essentially for people by $1, the average person.
Before this exemption, the tax rate was gonna be 1077. After the exemption was granted, the tax rate was 1077.
So essentially it's zero
It was zero, right.
on the tax. So as far as Charlie is concerned, the annual cost of this is very, for all the taxpayers who aren't exempted, the annual cost is very small.
Yes. I need my computer to.
And I had another question, but I've forgotten it, so I'll just let that go.
Rebecca, thank you. So you mentioned that you thought that probably some people didn't apply or didn't qualify because of the asset limit.
Yes.
So, according to the assessor's website, it says the Board of Assessors has set an asset limit of 250,000. So do you know, is that true whether it's one person or a couple? It's still 250,000?
Right, so if they're filing at the state level as married, either owner could own the particular asset, and it would count towards the asset limit.
Okay.
So if it was
still
only in
250.
one name,
Yeah.
it would count.
But if it's a couple, I guess I'm asking if it's a couple, then does that mean it's 500,000
No.
or it's still 250?
250.
And then since the Board of Assessors can set that, do you have any flexibility of saying, typically when people retire, say you retire at 65, you have a lot more assets, and would the assessors have any possibility to set the asset limit at a different place for different people?
Yes, we've talked about increasing that number.
Because it seems like that's a pretty powerful lever if you want to control how much this ultimately costs. If you adjust what the asset limit is, you could include a lot more people or exclude people. Okay, thank you very much.
Grant, I'm sorry, Chuck and then Grant.
So I want to go back to something Alan asked. This year, when we did the 75% model, we violated the levy rule. But yet we didn't violate it at 50%. Okay, so to Alan's question, would there be a scenario where at 50% we violate the levy rule, but at 100%, at 200%, we don't violate the levy rule? Or is this kind of just a
Very unlikely.
Yeah.
So there's a phenomenon, well, very unlikely is what I'll say.
Okay.
Because
it's a linear.
So it's where that rounding happens.
Okay, I'm just wondering, so if let's say very unlikely it happened, because would we be forced into the 200% option if that worked out with the levy rule?
No, well,
Because
I would leave that up to council.
There's a potential, if it's the only option that exists, be a good question, do you have to take it?
Right.
Because
My gut reaction is, yes,
Okay,
right, shall be voted each year.
so more of the reason to change this rule.
Grant?
Thank you, Mr. We've, you mentioned this already. What's the assessment limit, 1,570,000, is that?
I'm sorry, I don't.
What is the assessment limit?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I don't have the exact number. I'm guessing that it's 1,057,000.
Okay.
Very close to our average single-family value.
Right, thank you.
I'll toss it.
I'm still trying to get my head around it. It's just harder and harder as I pile up the years on this committee. If this is a tax shift. If you're shifting from the 20, 30, 40 to everybody else, they probably won't even notice, but the levy should be the same.
Yes, it is.
So if the levy is the same, no matter what, and we and we determine that, you know, when we do the budgeting, it goes to a levy limit, why would this shift ever put you over the levy limit?
There's because of the rounding.
Now, the rounding would be a penny, which would be 17,000. If that happened,
It's a half
we're trying to figure out how to do it from the back. If it happened, why couldn't the assessors just drop the overlay? They determine the overlay all by themselves. So if we use 600,000 and we have a problem with a penny, why couldn't they just drop it to 580,000 and the problem is solved? We got millions of dollars in the overlay, I'm sure.
3 million.
Yeah, so if they have to put 580 in one time instead of 600, my understanding,
I'm sorry, 580 into what?
The overlay.
if they reduce the overlay from 600 to 580, that covers, you know, a penny.
Oh, the budget.
And that's all by you, it doesn't have to go through town meeting.
I think the issue is that this is, the overlay is appropriated at annual town meeting.
Right.
This program,
No, it isn't. The overlay is determined by the Board of Assessors.
No, no, no.
Not what goes in, what comes out.
what goes into the overlay every year is.
No, what I'm talking about is the initial
What previous?
overlay that's the Board of Assessors set every year, and we have on our spreadsheets is 600,000. But that isn't appropriated by town meeting. We appropriate money out of the overlay, but we don't appropriate money into the overlay. That's an assessor's. And so if you get to the point where that penny is putting you over, they could just reduce their overlay, the overlay from 600 to 580, problem solved.
I would have to defer to DLS on that.
We looked at this and DLS our act specifically does not allow us to use the overlay to balance it.
We're not using the overlay balances, we're just putting less in.
Okay, we explored this and using the overlay to produce various outcomes at different levels, we were not allowed to do that.
And it's a timing thing, Al. The amount that's being budgeted into the overlay is established at the budget at town meeting. We don't know where this rounding problem comes in until we establish the total value of the town in September.
But the town meeting doesn't establish the overlay.
They establish from the budget, what goes into the overlay, yes.
No.
Yeah,
Yeah,
they
we
do,
provide
not what
them.
comes out. They do what comes out, but we do what comes in.
We have two overlayers.
One out, but right, and the amount of money that comes out of the overlay, we appropriate. The Board of Assessors releases it, and the town meeting appropriates it. But the setting of the actual 600,000 overlay that's in the revenue, that's determined by the board.
We don't determine that amount that goes into the overlay.
This town might not let the assessors do it, but I think under state law, the overlay is determined by the Board of Assessors.
So I think I know what you're saying. We can actually collect in the tax recap an additional amount of money if it's needed for the overlay. We add it right to the tax rate. But it's never done. It's, you know, if we had to do that, I've made a huge mistake somewhere. That's the only time we add money to the overlay. Other than what's budgeted at town meeting.
What was budgeted is what we take out of the overlay as a revenue source. When we appropriate, when the amount of money that goes into the overlay, well, I don't want to get this back and forth, but that's an assessor decision, not a town meeting decision.
Sorry, I have to disagree.
Alan Jones.
I'm gonna go back to this calculation. If I look at the scenarios that you did, that 75% is 160, 160, one of it's 166,205, it goes to 75%, 166,340, which is the highest number, then 329, a little over. You get to 200%, it's 166,285, which is just a little bit of tweak the valuation, it comes under the limit. I still think there's a scenario here where without this change, the select board could be forced to use the higher percentage because the lower percentages don't work. Because of the rounding.
There's a possibility that you could be choosing
Correct.
between 50 and 200% or
Whereas
only 200%.
with this change, especially if it's limited to the overlay, it's up to the select board. They can pick anything they want, but they're not forced to go in anything. So we're not, by doing this, we wouldn't say you have to go to 100%. No, they can still go to whatever the lower limit is. But I think without this change, they could possibly be forced into going to a higher percentage. Is that mathematically correct? Maybe low, maybe
It's
low
mathematically possible.
Yeah. But I think that the 166,285 is pretty darn close. If I fiddle with the valuation a little bit, it goes under the limit.
Dean?
So, just a thought, this isn't directly to the article, but since we're talking about it, it's my own personal take, is every time I hear a conversation about senior citizen exemptions, we get very nitty gritty on top line revenue and things like that. The reality, though, is senior citizens are far cheaper.
Can you speak a little
I
louder,
said,
please?
we talk a lot about top line revenue when we deal about senior citizen exemptions. The reality is, senior citizens are a lot cheaper than the people who are going to buy those houses, right? So like, you know, when we did demographic studies as the school was expanding, one of the things we learned right away was homes turnover by and large when people hit age 70, right? And if you look at, I like Lexington as a benchmark community, I had to look it up, right? So Lexington has like 35,000 residents. They have 6,800 kids in the school, right? Huge amount of spending, right? But this is where I always feel like these discussions go off the rails. If you can extend the time somebody's in their home from age 70 on average to age 80, you will by default decrease the school age population because you won't have the same turnover coming through. That's what goes on in Lexington, right? Lexington and Wellesley have huge school age populations, right? Wellesley's the worst, Lexington's the worst, because people come from out of state with executive jobs, they meet a realtor, where should I live? Lexington, Wellesley. They stay there until the kid gets to age 12 or grade 12 or 13, they take a new job, boom, they're gone, right? So you need longer lifespans of people in town, right? And so the more and more so we talk about this top line like it's a problem, right? And sometimes I feel like we hold the line on the top, like it's holy, realizing that, you know, I've got 2 kids in school right now, right? So just using a per pupil average, just on schools alone, I cost this place $30,000 a year. I don't pay $30,000 a year in taxes, right? So if I were to leave when the second one picks up his diploma, I'm gonna be replaced by somebody who's married with no kids and then will have a kid in the school in 7 years. That's how the statistics and demographics work. So you really wanna take somebody in my place and move me, like you wanna move people as they get older to stay in their homes. Because even if they're not paying, we talk about, they're not paying as much in taxes, they don't cost you as much. That's just my thought. And I feel like we never take the time, because that's a deep, difficult analysis to do. And so we tend to just do the easier one, which is like, ooh, this is how it will hurt the top, not if we extended the life cycle of people in town for 5 more years, so they didn't leave on average till 75. How would that help the budget? And let me just give you a simple way to compare this, okay? Why are taxes lower in down the Cape? Go to Mashpee. Why is the tax rate so much lower in Mashpee? And the answer is they have fewer kids in Mashpee schools. It's always how the math works. And that's it, right? And that's just my 2 cents. Everyone goes the easy way. We look at the top line. You never look at the bottom line impact.
All right, any final questions? Amy?
So I just wanna be sure I understand this. this is literally a tax shift. That $21,000, it's not that we didn't collect it, it's who we collected it from. We collected it from people who aren't eligible for this or didn't apply for this particular exemption.
Yes.
And then I just wanna reiterate what Jennifer said, which is that the people of the town of Arlington voted for this overwhelmingly. They voted for this tax shift. And overwhelmingly enough, that it was a lot of people who are not eligible for this tax shift who voted for it. They voted to pay extra taxes to allow some seniors who are income strapped and asset strapped to be able to stay in their homes. Which is the thing we always say an override is gonna do. It's gonna force people in this category out of their homes, and we voted not to do that. Thank you.
Okay, so, the assessors haven't decided yet, haven't voted on this.
Have not voted.
And they haven't come up with exact language of what's gonna be before town meeting. Or is
Correct.
this okay, and that will happen on the 24th.
Yes.
And then it needs the official warrant article hearing would actually be before the select board, likely on the following week, probably the 31st.
Who would do the recommended vote, the select board or the FinCom?
Select board, it's a bylaw amendment, home rule.
And is there, an overlay surplus number for us yet, 600,000? Is that, are we doing typical 600,000 this year?
So surplus is a different animal.
Yeah, the article,
The amount that we're looking to take from the overlay, yeah, we're looking for 400,000 this year,
400,000.
right? That has not been voted.
Okay, and that will be voted on the 24th as well?
When the assessors release the overlay.
Oh, no, we won't get to that on the 24th.
Yeah, it'll be sometime on approach.
I have to I have to do a bunch of different calculations.
So we will not take a position on that then,
Not yet, yeah.
or unlikely to before town meeting. So we have to have a report done. So our report will be done before there's a number for us. All right.
And I would just say that I would not object to tabling this for another year and getting a committee established to recommend language changes and reapply next year. Unfortunately, it's just, there's a lot to it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. And anyone's welcome to call me in my office if anything else.
Thanks, David.
Okay,
Thanks, Kayla.
don't leave, tell me.
Pump the brakes, being opportunistic, given that HERO Act is also
Yeah,
a
so-
warrant, and that is also handled through the assessor's
Yeah,
office.
so we're gonna go through the warrant now that we have the town manager and the deputy town manager with us, and the first article, after Article 15 is Article 20, the HERO Act. So, Dana, do you wanna explain what the HERO Act is all about, or what the impact is?
So, I'm happy to jump in. Not my area of expertise. This is something that is going to be is being carried forth by our Veteran Services Director, who was out of the office today. But it's recent legislation signed into law that provided some had some provisions that provided for tax benefits for veterans. There's two particular clauses of the HERO Act. It's 22I and 22J. The only one that was that after speaking with the Veteran Services Director that we sort of said like, hey, that would be a good idea for the warrant was 22I, which would provide for a COLA that's tied to the Federal Department of Labor CPI for the preceding year. The HERO Act also provided, as I mentioned, for a clause 22J, which would have increased the personal exemptions for all veterans over a number of categories. However, that cannot apply in a year in which a municipality is already using the general law, chapter 59, section 5C.5 to grant an additional exemption amount. And Arlington voted back in 2006 to increase all exemption amounts for this sort of state baseline level by 30%. So in other words, for our veterans to reap the benefit from 22J, we would have to forego the previously authorized 30% increase for all of the statutory exemptions for qualifying residents, which are elderly, blind, widowed, disabled, surviving spouses of police and firefighters killed in the line of duty. So those were all voted in 2006. So when the Veteran Service Director brought that provision forward, when we researched and demonstrated like, hey, if we were to pursue that, we were to try to implement that, it essentially leaves out everyone else who's already enjoyed a plus 30% benefit. So that clause we are not putting before town meeting because we think that would have a net negative benefit on the taxpayer. So what this would do is apply a COLA based on the CPI, which, what was it last year,
3.41%.
onto what is the state baseline exemption amount for qualifying veterans. Is that, sorry, Dan, is that 400 or I don't even know the
Yeah, so-
baseline number.
Yeah, so you have to know the baseline number, which is where you start with and what you would calculate the cost of living increase on. We have two veterans exemptions where this would apply. The base 22 exemption is $400.
Okay.
And for what's called the 22E, the baseline is $1,000. And so the cost for all 110 veterans applications under those two programs was $2,516 for the year.
I'm sorry, what's wrong?
$2,516.
Questions, Annie?
Okay, so that's 2,000 whatever in the aggregate for all 110 veterans this year. And then next year, the COLA raise would be on top of that, similar to our 2.5%? Or it
No,
would just be next year's COLA would be whatever the CPI
will be applied to the base rate.
again.
Yeah.
So this is not cumulative. This is we're applying to the base rate every year a little bit to make up for inflation, basically. Okay, got it. So it's a couple $1,000s a year forever.
Any other questions? All right, well, thank you.
Thank you, Dan. Appreciate it.
So,
All right.
have a good night, everyone.
Thank you. All right, well, that
Thank you.
brings us in the warrant to Article 24, the revolving fund, 17 Irving Street. You want to talk about that?
So 17 Irving Street, we're looking to set up a new revolving fund. This is under a different authorizing legislation than chapter 50. What is it? In all of our other revolving funds, we're looking to set it up under chapter 40, section 3. This allows, so 17 Irving Street is the Parmenter School. So we have a tenant at the Parmenter School that currently pays to rent the space. What this will allow us to do is set up a revolving fund to collect rents, to collect a portion of rents to be used on utilities. We can act as essentially a pass-through. There's always, with utility payments, there's always a weird lag issue. We have 12 periods in a fiscal year. Oftentimes utilities are paid following on a 1-month lag. This would allow us to make all of our payments without having this money have to close to the general fund. Operationally, we're already doing something like this. It doesn't require establishing. However, if we want to be able to carry this money over year to year, we do need to vote to authorize this. Additionally, a benefit of this, having this as a revolving fund, would allow us to collect a portion of that rent to be utilized on maintenance, repairs, and small capital projects. And so as a portion of that lease, there is a minor component of a capital payment that comes in as a part of each month's rent. And so we would segregate that separately to be used on future capital projects. So we're seeking favorable action on this.
Any questions on that, Michael?
That's a provision that's already written into the lease?
Correct.
Charlie?
I thought that money that we received from rentals of town-owned property had to go into the general fund.
This is, I may have not been clear, this is to cover just utilities and a small portion of capital that is segregated from the rent. You are correct that rent goes to the general fund.
Thank you.
Yep.
All right, any other questions on Article 24? All right, the rest, now into zoning until we get to Article 44, the paid access budget, and do we have numbers yet at all?
I have some numbers. I did not send anything to anyone. It's just a spreadsheet.
Okay, but you do have numbers that you can provide us?
Yeah, I can email you.
Okay, that'd be good, and I'll distribute to everyone.
Okay.
The final numbers generally come from ACMi directly.
Yeah.
Based on, you know, their projections of what the quarterly payments have been.
Okay, parking benefits.
I apologize, when we scheduled to come tonight, I was not aware that we have a parking advisory committee on the 11th, so they still have to vote, take their final vote for the budget, so we don't have that this evening. I didn't realize it wasn't in its final form. That's on me.
When you get that, if you can send it our way.
Yep. But yeah, if we voted on the 11th, it could be here. Wednesday is the 12th, so.
That'd be great. No amendments to 25 budgets. Appropriations, capital rescinding, Article 52, the transportation infrastructure fund.
Yeah, so we'll be seeking a vote on this to transfer let me get you the total amount. Sorry, I have it printed here. $31,395.80. This must be released with a town meeting vote. This money is being directed to be used on the Blue Bikes program. After discussions, the town manager, do you want to take, so with our transportation planner, John Alessi, the town manager, made the determination that we're not gonna spend any operating dollars on the Blue Bikes program, and it will be exclusively using this TNC money. This is generated every time somebody takes an Uber or Lyft or a rideshare, either originating from or arriving in Arlington. We get a small little piece of that, and it comes back to us in the form of a check from the state. Next year, it'll be the $31,395 that I just mentioned, and then that'll go to support the operation of the Blue Bikes program in town.
Do you anticipate that Blue Bikes will ever be able to stand on its own?
An interesting question. I don't know. Well, it depends on, there's a lot that goes into it. We just signed, we have a new contract. We're in a new sort of consortium with Blue Bike towns. It depends on the number of stations, the number of bikes you have, and the number of, we'll call them bike trips that are taken. So it depends, hopefully. I don't know though.
So there's a new contract now?
Right.
And
You know,
what's,
we're still within contract through late spring of '26. And then MAPC will do another multi-year procurement to see if there are any other providers willing to take over the system, or if Blue Bike is still the best provider.
Charlie and then Michael.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Do we have to spend any more money on capital for stations?
There's no more,
Let me take that. We have had to spend capital to expand the number of stations. So it's sort of this, the more stations you have, the more bikes, hopefully we reach that saturation point that Al is talking about. But even this TNC money doesn't fully cover the year-over-year operating costs. So most of these program costs are being funded by a grant from Mass DOT.
But we don't have to put any more stations in.
We're not obligated to, but we have been expanding the fleet with grant funds.
So how many more stations do you think we have to expand to?
We don't have to expand any more stations. From my perspective, I think the only area where we probably need to consider getting a station is somewhere in Arlington Heights. Seems to be the area of town where we have not sort of had any penetration or reach to yet. So as far as I know, that's sort of the next area folks would be looking to expand the station.
And that won't require capital expenditure by Arlington?
Not by Arlington, no. We have been sort of held a firm line that we weren't going to be seeking any more appropriations for Blue Bikes in the interim, but fortunately we were successful in getting grants to support the growth of the program as well as ongoing operations, and then to be supported by these TNC monies, which are set aside for like transportation capital projects, which 30,000 isn't really gonna get us anywhere in there to support mass transit or bike transit operations. So it was a fairly neat fit.
Thank you.
So in addition to the 31,000, you're also getting state grant money to support the Blue Bike program?
Already received, yes.
Already received. Michael?
I anticipate there'll be an interest on the part of some town meeting members to have as grainy as analysis as you can provide on trips originating, trips arriving, total public support per rider in the seat of one of those bikes.
Agreed, and I will make sure, as I did last year, that the transportation planner is there and has run all his numbers.
Thank you.
We do have access to a dashboard that obviously provides for a lot of that information.
That's all, thank you.
Any other questions on Part 52? So, sewer, maintenance, locations. Private ways, Article 63.
63, so this year we're seeking, is it again, $100,000, as we did last year, to continue seeding the private way repairs fund to fund up the town portion of upfront costs associated with private way betterments. I don't have the select board office's sheet with me this evening, but I do understand there's yet another pipeline of projects that have already submitted and are under are waiting cost estimates. So again, these are funds that, that once the town puts up the money, if a resident chooses not to pay up front, it is collected via the real estate taxes over the course of 5 years at a 5% interest rate. So those collections come in with the taxes and go back into the general fund. So we're not actually permanently expending any public dollars on the private asset. We're just sort of fronting money to those households who, on a betterment project, are not willing to pay upfront, as many of the residents do.
Any questions? Okay, Art 64 ACMI, do you have anything new to add to what you had already told us, I think, at our second meeting when we invited you? Any new update or?
No, and has ACMI presented to this?
Yes.
They have, okay. I'll admit, we, as a management team have met, we met with ACMI previously this year regarding this particular request for $200,000. And, after sitting down and reviewing the town's long-range plan and understanding where we were at in the budget and trying to fit all of the town departmental operating needs within, the ascribed 3.25% expenditure growth cap, and not being able to fund departmental needs, and in fact having to cut level of service with trash and recycling, where we arrived at was that we would not be able to assume any cost associated with ACMI this year as sort of like a town departmental operating line item. And at that point, was asked by leadership at ACMI, what other avenues may exist? And I said, well, the hard 3.25% cap, applies to, this particular line in the long range plan and pertains to all town departmental operations, but I guess nothing would have precluded ACMI from pursuing a distinct and separate appropriation, under the warrant article line from this committee. I just asked that they do so via the pursuit of a separate warrant article, so as to not allow any debate or discussion for like a taxpayer direct appropriation to ACMI to in any way jeopardize or get confused with what is the existing appropriation. I think this year under Article 45, which is where the town passes through in their entirety all of the franchise fees that we collect from Verizon, Comcast, and RCN. So just want to sort of lay the groundwork of, this, where we are now originated from a prior discussion of like trying to be incorporated into the town's budget, not being able to, find the capacity to do so, and then advising, if they want to continue the conversation, it would best be done through a, separate and distinct warrant article. At the same time, where we thought we could help, that we couldn't help on the revenue side of the equation with respect to an appropriation, we thought we could help with some of their expenditures, and I'm committed to pursuing what is called essentially a public purpose procurement. Obviously, ACMI operates a studio at 85 Park Ave, which is a building in the town's portfolio. There is a rental agreement. We are, sort of past term on that, and we are in a position where we could re-procure that. And if the select board agrees, we could forego that, just north of $45,000 a year in rental revenue by, if we do it for public purpose, it can be for $1 per year. And that, though we can't help with the revenue, would help on the expense side of the ledger and try to sort of provide some capacity or relief in ACMI's budget for the upcoming year in that fashion. And, we would continue to look at potentially other expenses being incurred by ACMI directly related to the building that could be considered or construed as justifiable expenses for us as the landlord to find a way to fund. And those things, we thought we were not only within our means, but within our capacity to try to provide some relief given the situation that's been presented by ongoing cord cutting, for lack of a better word.
Alice, did you have a question? Oh, John.
Do you have a sense how this is being handled in other cities and towns? I mean, this is a statewide problem. I'm wondering, do other towns provide public funding for their public media?
I'm aware through conversations with the executive director of, I believe, 2 municipalities that have chosen to, I don't know if it's already underway or have chosen to pursue a pathway where they would devote some tax dollars. I believe Somerville is one of them. And is it a community with an N? I don't know if it's Needham, Natick, or Newton. Right, find them all in one basket. So I think there's at least one or two that have contemplated pursuing dedicating public funding. I believe there's some anti-aid considerations to be made where I think tax dollars can be used for if the peg stool has 3 legs.
Yeah.
I don't think you can fund the public, the P. I think you could dedicate tax dollars to like the educational and governmental programming legs.
It sounds like it's pretty unusual at this point today.
As far as I know, yes. In fact, we are fairly unusual in that we as a municipality don't maintain or retain any of the dollars that pass through the community. We take every dollar and we send it through. Our agreement with ACMi says the town should be retaining, perhaps $10,000 a year. I'm not even sure we've done that. So we're a bit unique in that we choose, and rightfully so, to pass the money all the way through. Many municipalities will take a percentage or a fee and fund the equipment that they may have within town facilities.
And I believe that the current contract requires them to cover select board, town meeting, and school committee, I think.
Yes, that is the minimum level of service.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, any other questions on Article 65, 64? All right, 65, John Warden came in the other night
Okay.
and indicated that they were looking for something in the vicinity of $5,000. And we encouraged them to talk to you to see whether that signage can be taken care of other than an appropriation in town meeting. I don't know if they've reached out to you yet.
I have not heard from Mr. Warden. I did get an email from the chair of the Historical Commission looking to discuss same. And as I think about where we might be able to do that, I think given that park area falls squarely within our parking benefit district, that could be an avenue, given that we've generated a bit of a surplus there where we could consider, because we do usually carry site furnishings or signage within that budget, that might be an avenue where we could fund something of that nature.
Any questions on that?
Is that something that could be decided before we have to go to town meeting?
Yeah, what I'm thinking, we would actually factor it into the parking benefit district budget. The parking advisory committee meets on the 11th, and we can have the budget for the 12th.
Great.
So carry a signage line in there and try to.
Michael, sure.
Some of the historical interpretation about the railroad was previously provided along with other items of interpretation in the granite steps that were in place in the ground prior to the redesign and reconstruction of the park. Do you know where those granites are?
I can't say that I do. Happy to inquire about where they may have ended up, but I don't know off the top of my head.
About a dozen of them inscribed with various historical facts about Arlington and its history.
And they weren't reused on site in any capacity?
They were not repurposed or reinstalled.
Okay.
I don't know where they were laid down, where they are at present.
Okay. Hopefully we know what they said. Is that the information we're gonna be putting back on the sign, or?
Some of it.
Some of it, okay.
John has a whole book he could let you have.
Right, yeah. All right, Article 66, master plan.
Disregard, no action.
All right.
Copy and paste from last year's warrant when this one was created.
And any local.
Easiest one all day.
What about local option taxes?
No local option taxes to consider this year. If you ever talk to your legislators, tell them to support the Municipal Empowerment Act. There is some good local option there to increase like meals, lodging taxes, so, by marginal percentages, but, every bit helps, but nothing to consider this year, because not yet clear when or if that may make its way through this cycle.
And last one is collective bargaining. Anything to report?
At this point, all of our public safety unions are, continuing to proceed, alongside the town down the path of arbitration with what's known as the JLMC. And all other units are already under agreement for the 25 through 27 cycle.
Okay, does anyone have any questions on any of the warrant articles, John?
So just that collective bargaining, if I understand correctly, the policemen are pretty much 3, maybe 4 years into negotiating that contract. So that's gonna be a pretty sizable reserve put aside somewhere, right?
Yeah, we have annually, as part of our budgeting, we make assumptions on what we think we will ultimately settle at, and we set that money aside in the salary reserve account. We've been carrying that for these individual units for those individual years in that account.
Yep, so, okay, and that's, I guess I don't have to get into the accounting, but there's a specific account that says,
Yeah, it's called Reserve for Collective Bargaining, and it essentially sits there on the books, and we carry the cash in that account.
Got it, thank you.
Administrator, you're looking for a salary reserve of $436,814?
For that number, yeah, so 436, that number may slightly move up or down as the finance committee makes modest modifications to the budget up or down. We will balance the budget on the salary reserve account. So it may go up by a few $1,000s or down by a few $1,000s, but that'll be how we balance the budget is into that account.
Got it. So, excuse me, so the 430, that's the current year cost,
Right.
current year cost.
Correct. That's what we anticipate for those units for FY '26.
Yep, and so that 437, it's not going through like the police budget, it's going through a separate line item.
Right, it's set aside, so anyone, so how that works is anyone who is due a step, they still get their step.
Yeah.
They just do not get cost of living adjustments because those are prescribed within the contracts. And so for for transparency, the ranking officers here are unsettled as of the FY 22 to 24 cycle, they are not settled for that. They would then need to catch up for another contract following if they went on that 3-year deal. Our patrol officers are looking at a 25 to 27 deal, which is like what we settled for our town unions, our municipal unions last year.
Yeah.
We're in the middle of that contract cycle, and same with our firefighters. And all 3 of them are at various sort of stages in this procedure through the JLMC.
Got it, okay, thank you.
Any other questions on the warrant? All right, we have a few other questions for you. An issue came up when we had Human Rights Commission in on Monday night about email addresses. So why don't they have them?
As of today, they do.
Okay.
Every single member.
Really?
What, did you watch the tape?
No, someone give me a heads up.
Who would that?
You're welcome.
I wasn't gonna out you two.
All right.
So apparently no one had ever put in a help desk ticket to get the email addresses.
I
So, like-
take it. That's all we were waiting for.
A help desk ticket to request them and, provide the names is all it took.
Thank you.
Any other questions for the manager or deputy manager will have them?
Now I'll have a meeting with the IT director tomorrow saying, where do I get the money for those? Cause it's $260 per license, so.
Yeah. Anything else that we want to ask? Grant?
Oh, thank you, Madam Chair. I've asked some of the individual budgets, people this, and I'm sure they're going to ask me as well, about the vacancy issue. Is there anything And from a strategic level, what are we gonna, is there anything we're gonna do differently or have in mind about, other than anything different other than rubbing a lamp, hoping people come and stay?
Yeah, I think, we had quite a discussion about the facilities director and the constant vacancy there. Any thoughts, any ideas, any plans?
So what I can say is we have 3 viable finalists for final round interviews this coming Friday. We've been through a few rounds, and I'll frankly say we've had some good candidates. Unfortunately, the salary requirements of a good facilities director candidate far exceed that for which a municipal salary will support. We've had salary requests of upwards of $250,000 from certain candidates, and that's unfortunately not the pay scale that we live upon, but that is not unheard of for what private universities and other institutions, especially in like the hospital sector or others, may be paying. So I fear, because this is one of those positions where we've seen a lot of turnover, we provide a significant amount of valuable and varied experience over the course of 2 years. And it's experience that translates very well from our organization to other organizations. And I have a fear that like this is one of those jobs, unlike being a municipal treasurer or like, it's not so unique to municipalities, that these professionals have a significant amount of upward mobility to find themselves in other locations. So what I've been, knowing the experience that we've had, that we've, as I've looked at our candidate pool, I've tried to sort of pivot to considering candidates who may, or we have generally been hiring people who are well seasoned and have a lot of experience, that maybe we want to sort of find someone who's not at such a late stage in their career and is going to be able to move on so quickly. At the same time is trying to develop our own pipeline. And what I would say to that is, in most departments, if a department head moves on, we have some sort of assistant director or number 2 that we can lean on at least an interim basis. And we have done that on a number of instances. In the facilities department, that has never been the case, right? I tend to tap a retiree from an entirely different department to come help lead that effort. So what I proposed and what will ultimately be within the school department's budget for fiscal year 26 is taking one of our existing sort of administrative staff positions and increasing the compensation and duties associated with that position and trying to create an assistant director position, so that at least, if we were to continue to see turnover at the top position, we would be better positioned to have continuity with the operations within the department. Now, getting to the other ranks of the facilities department, I mean, we're going on more than a decade of not being able to ever fill our tradesperson ranks. That is not unique to Arlington as a municipality. It's the same for all municipalities. In fact, it's the same for many universities too. We have a number of residents who serve on committees who work in university settings, and it's similar that you can't get HVAC professionals or plumbers or electricians. And I think that will probably continue to be the case for everyone in the municipal sector until there was a downturn in the sort of Boston area construction economy. Because those folks in the construction side of things, you're going to be doing much better than, to be honest, somewhere between $30 and $40 an hour.
I'll toss to you.
Okay, just 2 questions. Are you still in the process of hiring a facilities director now? Is it too late for somebody to apply?
What I would say is yes. And if Friday doesn't go well, then no. We will repost.
Okay, and the second question is, have you talked to Minutemen about getting their plumbers and?
Yes, we have, and it turns out in Massachusetts, we can't take on any apprentices unless we have licensed trade professionals to oversee and supervise their hours, so it's a challenging predicament, but we've even considered like, okay, if we have contractors here on such a regular basis, could they perhaps serve that function? And every contractor is taking the apprentices for themselves to get the value of the labor, so it's not an easy situation. We're even trying to hire more high school students each summer to work in the facilities department. It's their summer job to get accustomed to municipal employment and see that it's, you know, a good opportunity, but that has led to us hiring a couple of school building custodians from the ranks of what were summer helpers postgraduate. So even if they may not be pursuing a career, you know, in that profession, you know, we are seeing that some of those folks are likely to stay with us for a few years and maybe even be the ones that will work second shift, which can be challenging to fill.
Be some federal workers looking for a job.
May not be
But, you know, and I don't wanna joke about it, I've already seen for a few of our postings, some people with federal experience on their resume, so that could be an applicant pool that may rear its head.
Annie?
So I have a question about the facilities department and a similar one about IT. I don't know if you wanna lean over, but how are we doing on consolidating facilities, maintenance, repair, operations into that department? I know, for example, that the town of Cohasset really sees its budget as having three sections, the town, schools, and the common functions. And it seems to me like facilities is headed there and IT ought to be headed there. Are you trying to? Should we be doing that? And what is the holdup on feeling like you've really created cohesive facilities and IT departments that cross the two budgets? And because I wonder if some of the facility director problem isn't frustration with what they have control of and what they don't, what they're responsible for, that they don't have control of, so on and so forth.
You know, I'm not sure anyone has said that that was particularly problematic in their service on the director's role.
Right.
Because, I mean, we've made great strides in that now. All of the sort of central or administrative staff of the facilities department are now actually all under one roof and under one office, and those positions do serve the entire portfolio, be it trades, you know, office manager, project manager, EMS manager, like they serve the entire portfolio. It's the building custodians who have specific assignments to specific buildings and that they really can't leave those buildings, but we have, as we have the opportunity with custodial positions, to be able to turn them into floaters so that we have more flexibility to assign them to different areas in town on given days to perform different tasks.
Alan Jones?
I was talking to the facilities director or head of Boston College, and they had like 300 some employees. I'm sure he gets paid a lot of money, but we have like 5. I'm just wondering if we're sort of defining the job. You know, when talking about comparative salaries, are we comparing apples to oranges? Are we defining the job correctly? In other words, I think the people are going to make $250,000 out there and have much bigger staffs and responsibilities. I'm just wondering if we're defining the job correctly.
I mean, in terms of like the position description does like define exactly how many buildings, what our square footage is, and how many personnel you'd oversee, which is, you know, if you include all of the custodians and the contractors, you do have a pretty significant reach in that position. I'll admit, like, I personally did the job for a few years, and granted, it was during the height of the pandemic, so it was particularly draining. it is 24/7, 365. There is something happening at every one of our buildings every single night, and your phone literally rings off the hook. We now have to like put it on a rotation so that one person isn't always fielding that on-call burden, because it is significant, right? Like an alarm is gonna go off in a classroom tonight because a window was left cracked open and the flag that's hanging on the wall is gonna blow a little bit, and it's gonna set off a motion sensor. It's gonna tell American Alarm to call the police department and the facilities department, right? Like, it is just, I only offer that to say, like, it is just an incredibly demanding job. And like in IT, you're an enterprise function, right? Like take the director of assessors, for example. Like, the only person that's gonna call him and ask him to do anything is Alex or myself, right? Like, the facilities director, you're getting a call from every principal, every assistant principal, every department head, anyone in school business office or central administration, anyone in town hall administration. Like, you just answer to so many people. And what we're trying to do is better define sort of that chain of command on both the town and school side, so we can help funnel communications to the facility department, so it's not, you're not just constantly being overwhelmed.
I can sympathize, because 3 times I've been called in the middle of the night by American Alarm because somebody left a helium balloon at the Masonic Temple.
And it started to come down. And don't get mice still.
Dean, did you have your hand up?
I did. So, water meters. So I don't know, I am late if we covered this, you can stop me, but, my understanding from our prior meetings is, so we've been at this effort to modernize our collection system for water since, like, I don't know, 2016, right? 9 years journey, probably a little old at this point. And it seems what we're being told is that the holdup is we have 800 people who are not answering the request to change over the meters. Now, I think I was person 801, so I don't have a lot of room to talk on this.
I think we're below 800, but I get your
It's
point.
good, but they've dragged it out too long, right? So I don't expect, as a honorable and hardworking public servant, that you would recommend to the select board draconian measures to compel this, like.
Then you don't know me, Dean.
I just
I'm
wanna
gonna
know.
start shutting water off.
No, like to me, it's like, I would assume we have 2 levers, right? We can shut their water off, which would be my preference. Or we could put like a huge fee on it to be like, okay, if we have this informing system, you have to pay for it, right? You get the benefit of, 1980s technology. So here's a $500 a month charge for the installation, maintenance, and disposal of your archaic meter. Is that outside the lines to do that?
He's taking notes, so I don't think so.
I've not considered it, right? There's turn off the water, there's simply start estimating the bills. Say, we're not gonna trust the technology, or we're gonna offload, the numbers, and perhaps you start estimating high.
Well, because I would say, like, the easy way is you just say, what's the cost of maintaining the current system? You're the reason we have it, so you have to bear the whole cost. So $500 a month administrative fee on top of your bill. And I would guess people would react fairly quickly to that. I mean, that would be strike 1. And strike 2 is you just shut the water off. Seems good to me, and then we're on to new technology by next year.
All right, just 2 last questions. Charlie, you had a hand up, and John.
I'll pass.
John?
Yeah, just back to the facilities budget real quickly. We actually have discussed this. I don't think we voted on it. And I feel like there's maybe a little bit of a disconnect because, you're mentioning, hiring the facilities director and, all the work that that department's gonna do. But I look at the budget and, I see the director of facilities, and then there's just, I think, 4 custodians, an administrative assistant, and then 1 building craftsman. So, like, I think we kicked around a little bit, like, should this department be absorbed into, like, the town manager's office or the DPW's office? In other words, is there even a budget here? It does come to a total of 1.4 million, which is a significant number. But is that the best way to spend the 1.4 million? Basically, we're gonna expand the facilities department or shrink it.
I mean, that's just, what you're seeing is just the town side of the facilities budget. Right, even many of those centralized staff, and, it's probably north of 50 people in the facilities department
So that's what
that have just traditionally been budgeted
to schools.
within the school department's budget.
So it's basically this and then schools.
Yes.
Okay,
So in the aggregate, it's actually rather substantive.
yep. And now, in addition to custodians, is there also like tradesmen and stuff within the schools department?
Yes.
There are, okay.
Plumbers, electricians, HVAC,
That's what I was missing. Okay, so
carpenters, they're entirely within the school budget.
Interesting.
But some of those positions have been historically vacant,
Yeah, 'cause
especially
when
the
you say it's
HVAC
hard to fill them,
positions.
I'm like, I don't see them, like, where are they? But that's where they are. Thank you very
Yeah.
much.
Well, thank you. It's been informative, thank you, and I look forward to getting some numbers from you.
Yep, will do.
And, thank you. And now let's finish a couple of budgets that we started.
Alice, so one question. Yeah, can you come over?
Shirley and Michael, are you ready to finish retirement?
Sure.
Okay, the floor is up. So, all right, everyone, the floor is with Michael.
Okay.
Quiet, quiet. Go ahead, Michael.
In the retirement budget, we had moved, seconded, and voted the number that's going to be in the warrant. The rest of our presentation, retirement, is consideration of the warrant articles that retirement department, Richard Greco, has asked town meeting to consider, and our notes on them. So this is more in the universe of warrant article considerations. There will be a warrant article that would recalculate the money that we pay into the trust fund that handles post-employment benefits, principally retirement. Can we go to the next slide? Principally health, yes, excuse me. Oh gosh, that's small. We have been funding, thank you, we've been funding our investments in this, it's much easier, to get to the point where the fund itself would generate the money that we would need to cover what we think our liabilities will be going forward for our retirees' healthcare. To summarize the charges here. Next slide, please. We've been funding this at combination of figures on the left, approximately $805,000 per year. What's the change anticipated? Next slide, please. This would be a change that I believe we do vote this every year.
It's a different article.
Different article. So let's go back up one. What would, down to, go ahead.
So, this is the OPEB, other post-employment benefits, principally healthcare. And, years ago, I think everybody knows, we had a, non-contributory retirement fund, and the members and the dependents of members that were employed by the town before 1939 eventually all became deceased. At some point, probably 15 years ago, Al Tosti and John Billiford came to the decision to sort of freeze that number at $500,000. And then even as people passed away, we would still appropriate that $500,000 every year. But the difference between what we gave to the survivors and the $500,000 would go into the OPEB account for the benefit of retirees. And so eventually everybody passed away as of about 4 years ago. So the entire $500,000 is now part of this warrant article. Secondly, when the town transferred from being self-insured to the GIC state health insurance program, we had a substantial amount of money in a health insurance trust fund in the town. We used some of it to cover pre-existing conditions that couldn't move over into GIC. And eventually, we decided to transfer some of these funds, and in addition, go to $155,000 a year to the OPEB to satisfy, again, to build up the OPEB fund. And then the recent override, the Board of Selectmen made a commitment to increase that by another $150,000 a year. So last year we appropriated $805,000, and that's what we're recommending this year. On the previous slide, if you can go back to that slide that says OPEB performance, I would just like to point out that we now have $28 million in the OPEB account, which is, you know, there was a time not so long ago when we only had a couple of $1 million in there. So we're moving along and getting that funded. And this fund has been transferred from another manager, fund manager whose name escapes me. It might have been, it's with an M, but I can't remember the name of it. But that money has now been transferred to CRIM. So the same state organization that's managing the employment benefits, the retirement benefits, is also managing our health insurance. So we are requesting that the committee, under the article which, let me ask Al Tosti, do you know the article number? Because when we put this.
68.
What is it?
68.
58. Under Article 58.
68.
That we vote $805,000 for the OPEB account.
Is there a second?
Second.
Questions, discussion? Chuck, Paul, and Annie.
Charlie, the $155,000, why don't we have to pay that anymore? The pre-existing conditions have gone away?
Well, it was pretty complicated, but we had 1.5 million in the account. We wanted to, so we put that in there, and we made an agreement with the retirees. I don't know how the select board did that exactly, and the town board did that exactly, because the retirees are always changing, right? But that became an agreement to, I think there was also something to do with Social Security too, if I remember, it's part of that agreement. So it's not a question of having to do it, it's a question of wanting to do it. Because the unfunded OPEB liability is substantial, 99 million or something like that. And we're at 28 million. So we're making progress in reaching that goal. And there's sort of an informal plan. I don't want to say informal plan. There's a concept. Projection. No, it's not a projection. It's a concept that when we pay down the contributory retirement, when we get to the end of those 8 years that we talked about the other night, that some of that money can be used to fund the OPEB until it gets to a self-funding point also.
That's great, but we, 155, we're free and clear on that. We don't,
Well, we're not free and clear, we're appropriating. I mean, that's.
right, you're appropriating, but you don't have to pay for pre-existing conditions too.
No, that's all been taken
That's all
care
we take care of from natural events.
Paul?
Thank you, moderator. So when do we expect this one to be fully funded?
I don't have a schedule off the top of my head or in hand. It's a little complicated because we don't know exactly what the health of the retirees is gonna be. It's hard to predict, number one. Number two, as we get, this is a little quirk, okay? As we start to fund this, and I can't tell you what the discount rate is now, but it's low. The practice of the general accounting, what's it called?
Yeah.
What is it?
Gatsby.
Yeah, Gatsby, the practice of Gatsby, thank you, is that if you're not funding it, you have to use a discount rate that's your cost of funds, which is like 2%, right? So that makes the liability huge. If you are funding it, you can eventually get to the point where you can use a discount rate that's equivalent to what the stock market earns. So the unfunded liability is a diminishing target. It's based a little bit on how much money we put in. So I can't answer your question beyond that.
And I remember back in some days past or years past that we were doing significantly better than most towns. Is that still true?
I don't know. We are, I think we're doing okay. At one point, we were only putting in 350,000 a year. Now we're at 850,000. And as you can see, it's $28 million. That's getting there.
Annie?
I think you might have answered my question, but so it's the discount rate is the reason that our liability is going down in the first column on this chart on this slide. So in 2020, our liability was $252 million odd, and now it's 192. And that's before applying that's not the net liability, but the total liability.
Yes,
Okay.
I would say generally that's true, but I don't, I haven't spent a lot of time studying let me put it this way, the actuarial information on the retirement fund is a lot more in-depth than the OPEB.
Right, so in other words, we don't know how much of that is the discount rate, how much of that is the change in the profile of our retirees.
No, I don't know.
Okay, so our retirees might be getting younger and healthier just due to some people.
Yeah,
aging out,
if they're
as you
healthier and they live longer, maybe, we don't know whether the health insurance costs are gonna go up or go down, right? If you're.
Right. True.
So.
If they die, if they down.
Okay.
And his earnings on $20 million.
Depends on who's coming in the other direction. Okay, and we're at 28 million. Do we have any future possibility of rounding up our contribution to $1 million before we finish the 8 years, or is that not something we would ever recommend?
Well, that's a combination of the select board, the long range planning committee, and the finance committee. That, in other words, this comes out, the retirement board is handling this warrant article as a courtesy. It's not really controlled by the retirement board.
No, I understand that. And there is still no legal requirement, like there's a legal requirement for us to fund our retirement liability. But there's still no legal requirement for us to fund this liability.
That's another gray area.
Gray area?
Yes. First of all, this is not legal, this is a sort of a commercial reason, but if you're not funding it, your bond rating is gonna go down the tubes. Because the bond handlers, the financial community looks for funding the OPEB because that's a big liability.
Right.
But more importantly, I think there's a serious issue is if the town decided not to fund the OPEB,
Mhm.
there's a question, and I'm practicing law without a license here, okay? There's a question as to whether this is an implied condition of employment. So the odds are high that the town would immediately be in litigation, and who knows what comes out of that.
Right, I'm not asking it.
So it's not a state law, but it could be a labor practice law.
Right, and it sounds like between the labor practice and the bond rating, we wanna be sure we're continually funding it. The point I'm making is we don't have a deadline for having it fully funded the way we have with the retirement.
That's correct.
So the rate at which we fund is entirely up to us.
That's correct.
And so that's the decision we have to make 8 years from now. To what extent do we want to put that retirement money into OPEB versus having some relief from continuous tax increases? So I'm just gonna raise that
John?
issue every year when we do this budget.
Sure. So just a clarification, so the other night we talked about retirement, and I think, the total current cost was like $3.5 million for the, to fund the current retiree expenses. And I think it looks like it was $7.5 million of cost, less $4.7 million of current contributions. Does that pays for the retirees' health care, right, on a day-to-day basis?
No,
No?
this
No.
does.
No, the retirees they are in the
Insurance.
budget, the healthcare
The
budget.
insurance, okay, so I knew it was somewhere in the current budget.
That's in the current budget.
That's in the
This
current
is,
budget.
this is just money that's going in the fund that says, okay, eventually, there's no money coming out of this to
Yeah.
pay the health
It's like
insurance.
in case of emergency, break glass.
No, eventually, this is a liability the town has. So on one hand, you have the bond community that says, this is a huge liability, are you doing something to cover it? And we are.
Yep.
On the other hand, the retirees and the existing town employees expect, I don't wanna say as a condition of employment, but as it's been common practice, that when they retire, their health insurance gets covered.
Yep.
Okay? So, they wanna see it covered. The state has not passed a law saying that it must be covered, as Andy pointed out.
Yeah.
So theoretically, the select board could say, we're not paying any more retiree health insurance. And of course, all hell would break loose at that point.
Yep. I follow. So if everything continued along the exact same practice that we're following, we would continue to fund retirees' health out of our current budget and would never, I don't wanna say it, we don't wanna relax, but we would never need the OPEB money because it's always gonna be funded out of our current budget.
No, it's not. When you have enough money that you can self-fund it, you pay it out of this budget.
And then we'd
And
get
it
a
would be treated
benefit,
the same
we get
way
a
as the other
benefit
one
from
is.
our current budget.
Exactly.
And I understand it's good accounting too, to be putting aside this money currently while we're receiving services, it's good accounting.
GASB, and I'm not sure if this is also stable, but GASB, when we put together the comprehensive annual financial report or whatever it's called, we have to list our health insurance, our OPEB liabilities. I mean, that's something that the accounting world requires.
Yep. Okay, that's really good clarification.
So we have a motion to appropriate $805,000 and seconded. What further questions do people have?
So
Anyone else have any questions on this, on warrant article 68? All right, so we'll take it for a vote. All in favor, raise your hand.
Aye.
2, 7, 8, 9, 10, 12, 15, 16, 17. 4, any against, and 1
Abstain.
abstention.
Oh, you know what, I need to abstain, so I guess, I'm sorry, make it 16.
All right, raise your hand if
Sorry.
you, and yes. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. Any opposed? He doesn't vote. Any opposed? And 2 abstentions. Do you have anything else for your budgets?
We're all ready?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
So the next is they put in an article to increase the calculation base of the COLA. If you could go to slide 16, please. That's the one.
Which one article is this?
I don't, do you have that number?
Alan? Al, do you have the warrant number? Hang on, I might have it incorrect.
We want to address,
Pension adjustment,
Maybe I
62.
skipped one. Oh, I did, I skipped an article, I'm sorry.
Oh, yeah.
Pension 62.
If you go to slide 15, there's an article to increase retiree salary to 50% of the active position pay. This is an article that we vote every year. The typical cost is about 25 to 50,000. It affects the oldest retirees and just a few, a fairly small number. And basically, the town has been the practice of the town for as long as I can remember. And the reason is that the retiree benefits increase by an amount, a percentage equal to the town's normal COLA in the labor agreements, but it only applies to the first $15,000 of the retiree's benefits. So in practice, what happens is active employees have their salaries increasing at 3% a year on the full salary, and retirees have that same COLA, but it's only on the first 15,000. So eventually, their retirement benefit falls lower and lower with respect to what active employees are getting. And so this is meant to address that. Several years ago, I can't remember the language exactly, but I don't know, Altasi put a phrase in there to, I'll just use the generic term, cut out the deadbeat cheating of some people who figured out how to work their way around the article.
I just close a loophole.
That's close the loophole. So, so in any event, there's not a specific number. This is paid for out of the retirement fund, but the typical cost, depending upon the people who might qualify, is around $25,000.
And can I just add something?
Yes.
Point of information. Going back to Alice, when you made that motion, that's 25 years of service or more, not less. You have to be on 25 years of service.
So that's a motion moving favorable action on that article.
And we're 62,
62, okay.
but there's no money involved.
No money directly appropriated, but it comes out of the fund. You know, the fund pays for it.
We apparently tried to get rid of this many times, and town council keeps saying you gotta vote it every year.
Seconded, if nobody seconded.
All right, any discussion on Article 62?
Excuse me, it's literally the exact same word every year, like the exact same, like cut and paste.
It is, yeah.
All right, all in favor, raise your hand. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. Any opposing and 2 abstentions? Raise your hand, 2 abstentions. All right. Okay.
This is not something we voted on before. This is,
Yeah.
except next warrant article, sorry, no, not that word.
I don't even find it in there. You sure it survived?
It did not.
I don't remember this.
That seems in the warrant.
Yeah, I'm not sure if got into one.
I don't see it in the warrant.
Maybe we should ask somebody about this.
Well, it was certainly given to us as something that retirement was intending on.
Didn't make it to the warrant.
Okay, then we need to deal with it.
All right,
And we are concluded.
all right, thank you very much. Carolyn, can you do human resources in 5 minutes?
I can.
Then go for it.
Okay, so, this was quite a headache. All of the numbers are staying the same, but we did change the page. Did I email it to you?
I don't know, what would you like pulled up?
Look at new, let me go to mine.
You uploaded it.
Go to the reclass and HR budget draft, and then there should be one that says F, 2025-33 FY 26 HR budget book. Did I put that in there?
Reprint? Yeah, so
Reprint?
reprint, have the bottom one.
Okay, so that one, and then the one right below it is 2025-33 FY 26 general gov salary HR reprint.
Can we start here? We'll start here, let me make it bigger.
So on the HR budget book reprint, the salary number has changed. Longevity has not. The human resources total salaries has changed. And therefore, both the human resources appropriation total and the human resources taxation total has changed.
So do you have a motion, Carolyn?
I have a motion that we move to accept the new changes and the new budget, which is a total of 435,721.
Is there a second?
Second.
Questions for Carolyn?
People were concerned about the salary of the benefits accountant who's also getting a reclassification. And what we figured out was that her current new classification of MTP3 step 6, which you see on that new salary sheet, is because if she were to jump to her next step at her current OFNU position, she would be above the MTP3.5. No, her current amount would be above the MTP3.5. If she were to jump another step, which she should have, that number would have been a little bit above the step she is getting at a grade 3 and a step 6. And so the HR director decided that the MTP3 step 6 was the closest salary to where she should be. It's a little bit above one and it's below the other. Does that make sense to people? Mm-hmm. Now, the other thing is you're seeing the salary change on this salary sheet. The reason for that is when a director asks for the salary change within their budget, the numbers appear in the budget because they don't appear in the reclass. The only time someone goes through a reclass is if the employee requests the change. And in this case, it was the director who requested the change. Town meeting still votes on the title change. And so that title hasn't shifted on this new salary sheet. But the town manager and that director have already decided what the salary will be. Does that make sense to people?
Anybody have any questions on this budget? All right, there's been a motion, it's been seconded. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Unanimous. Thank you, Carolyn.
Can I give one more piece of information?
You have 1 minute.
Okay, so the other thing I learned is, again, we talked about if there's two different steps listed in those two step columns, It's because, yes, it's because they get their step in January. And when that happens, the previous year, new pay salary, so in this case, the FY 2025 salary will never be accurate compared to what they're making in June of that year. If those two numbers are the same, which they're switching her to a step in July, then the number will be accurate. So if you have somebody where the salary doesn't make any sense there, look and see if there's two numbers in the steps. If there is, that's why the number doesn't make sense. I can give you the formula, but it's an odd formula.
Alright, thank you. Alright, so on Monday we have Minuteman, then we're going to we're gonna finalize facilities and then go into the DPW budgets. And I don't know if anyone else has any other budgets ready, and Alan?
Just one thing, unfortunately, I had to get called to a selectmen's meeting on Monday, which is 1 minute, and my budget is coming up. It's, you know, send me any further questions, I've got them from somebody, so they have them ahead of time. My recommendation, unless something drastic comes up during the presentation, is for favorable action on the budget. This will be the second year that the Minuteman assessment has actually gone down. I take no credit that it's my 2 years, but anyway, that's my recommendation. I'll try to be here.
It's all the work I did for you in advance.
And on Wednesday we have capital planning, and will we have material, Daryl, next?
Sure, yeah.
Alright.
Oh,
Carolyn?
You were planning on having a stop meeting on the 19th?
What?
March? Were you planning on having? The 24th. Oh, the 24th, okay. We'll be able to fit insurance in by the 24th.
Great. And the schools are the 24th. And disabilities will be the 24th.
Okay, so then.
I found in Mass General Laws, Chapter 59, Section 25, says exactly what Al Toski said about the assessors setting the overlay amount they get.
Of course.
Yes.
Of course. All right. Is that it, everyone? All right, we are adjourned.